Welcome everybody to this Devtoberfest session. We have a guest with us this morning, Jhodel, who will be talking about one of our main topics of the week, which is building Visual Studio Code extensions. Jhodel is a community member who has built several extensions and contributed them back to the community. So great to have you with us. And we'll get into the questions and content in just a second. First, I do have to say to anybody else who's joining, this session is being recorded. And the recording will be posted later. So if you have any objections to being a part of the recording, you do have to exit now. But otherwise, we're happy to have you. At any time, feel free to submit questions via the chat or the Q&A pod. I'll be watching for both of those, and I can relay any of those questions to Jhodel. But otherwise, let's go ahead and jump in this morning. Thank you for joining us, taking the time out, being a part of Devtoberfest. But maybe give you a chance to introduce yourself just a little bit.
Okay. First of all, thanks, Thomas, for having me here. And yeah, I'm Jhodel Cailan, and my location is Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I've been doing SAP since 2005, and I think it's, of course, I started with ABAP. And then as soon as SAP started to introduce UI5, I dig in right away, within 6 months after it has been released. And as a matter of fact, I've learned from some of the UI5 tutorials from DJ Adams. Back then, he was still in. Yeah, so I know he's the UI5 guy, and then of course Thomas here, our host, has been doing a lot of HANA stuff. So since 2016, I've started working in the HANA stuff, and then there's a lot of things that I've been doing with SAP and benefiting from a lot of the contributors in the SAP community. And then recently I realized, hey, I guess it's about time that, I can start sharing and contributing as well as I've benefited from, from a lot of the content providers.
Yeah, and it's great to have you with us, particularly, I mean, it's hard for us. My team is all in Europe or in North America, and it's difficult to often accommodate the Asian Pacific time zones, which you're part of. And we try to do early European morning with some things, or and cross over a bit. So what time is it there where you are right now?
It's 4:05 p.m.
Okay, all right. So towards the end of your day, very early in my day, because it's 4:05 a.m. where I'm at. So time zones are such a difficult thing to calculate sometimes. But appreciate you joining us, and it's great to have representation from your region and from that time zone block as well. So really appreciate that. I mean, I guess you gave a little bit of background, your personal background. So you've been in the SAP world. For those of us that have been around a little bit longer, it seems like a relatively short amount of time, but you're pretty well established. Like you said, you started in ABAP development, as many people in the SAP world do, but then you've obviously branched out. You mentioned UI5, but how did you get into to using Visual Studio Code, for instance? Because like a couple of years ago, that wasn't really a mainstream thing in the SAP development world. Did you come to it from some other development you were doing, or?
First of all, I get to notice it from SAP community. I think you're one of them, and DJ.
Yeah.
That started promoting in Twitter Visual Studio Code, and around the same time that the beta release for Business Application Studio was released. So it kind of like starts to give some idea that, hey, I cannot ignore this new IDE. And also our younger developers here uh, somehow more adapt into what's latest and trending.
Yeah.
So I got curious. So when I started, at first I find it difficult to use because it's different from the usual Eclipse experience. There's a little bit of getting used to, but after a while, I realized, hey, I like this stuff because I've been doing XSJS, I've been doing command line stuff, and all of the features like ESLint and stuff like that, I have full control,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then after that, I realized about the rich community support for VSCode extensions. And that's where I realized, hey, this is a very neat thing that you don't normally get perhaps when working with Web IDE, right? So I was working with XSJS, XSO data. Then I realized that there's not much of support in this area. So then I started to dabbling around with VS Code extension development.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the major things that like Web IDE is a very nice browser-based developer experience, but it's sandboxed or very black boxed, right? I mean, you do a build, but you don't really know or can influence that much what's going on behind the scenes of that command. But that's the first thing you notice about both the Business Application Studio and VS Code is you can do just about anything, right, that it's doing behind the scenes and influence it either through extensions or a lot of the stuff you can do from the command line as well. The command palette, the shell integration. I mean, it's a very different kind of experience. And I think that's what is liberating to developers, those that want to be able to get in there and influence the behind the scenes. That's usually what attracts people to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about the specific. Now you've created two, if I'm right, two extensions that you've donated to the community.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, maybe describe just from a high level what you've built and contributed to the community.
Okay, so at first, I've been using SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA and then move on to SAP Web IDE full stack. So the things that I gone used to about is that I cannot do development outside of this IDE. Unlike in UI5, they you could use SAP Web IDE or you could use Eclipse or any
Mm-hmm.
other IDE tool. So when I explore VS Code, then I realized you could do XSJS and XSO data as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I saw, hey, it's not even recognizing XSO data and XSJS. So it's a convenient tool when you're using JavaScript, but it's not convenient when dealing with XSO data and XSJS. So I started looking into syntax highlighting, and then I work on the icons because the files are not recognized and there's no icon representation. So I double around with setting up an icon team for them. So that's my first extension.
Yeah.
So when I published that and then started to work um, even more than in HANA, so there's lack of support also for the HANA configuration artifacts, HDB procedures. So basically all the HANA DB artifacts. So I tried to add them as well. And this year when cap model, by the way, I evaluated cap model last year. So I kind of like um, have the idea that, okay, maybe I'll just wait for a little bit and evaluate it again in 2020. So here comes 2020. I'm into the VS Code extension development, and I started moving into the CAP model. So I find that there's some simple elements that is maybe not provided. So I provide some syntax highlighting. I think that's those one of the things that I think the season file. So I started adding support for those, and sometimes it can be a little bit of annoying that when you copy paste code from maybe a SAP community and paste it into your working MTA file, sometimes there's like tab and spaces that that screwing up your build, entire build. So I put a check as well to make sure that it's spaces and it's not tabs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very common pain point. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So
So,
initially, I was thinking to develop it for my own convenience, but hey,
mhm,
I started try to learn how to package it and share as an open source extension to the community.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, starting with the icons, that makes a lot of sense. That's where a lot of people start, either icons or themes. Pretty easy to integrate that in as a VS Code extension. But then the syntax highlighting or code completion or anything like that, that's pretty deep end stuff. And to have tackled that, I mean, you're building grammar parsers for something that, well, I mean, how did you build the grammar parser for those items? Because frankly, SAP, I don't think probably publishes all of that in a very consumable way, like the grammar for SQL script, for instance. Did you just sit there and kind of reverse engineer it and type it all up, or did you extract something out of the system? How did you go about doing that?
Okay, so what I did for that is Microsoft has a very rich documentation.
Uh-huh.
So they give the example, simple examples in their documentation, but their GitHub repository for the actual extensions, because VS Code extensions is a first citizen of Visual Studio Code IDE.
Yeah.
So all the existing grammar parsers that they have for JavaScript, TypeScript are actually built as an extension.
Hmm.
So I look up into their extensions, and everything is open source. So what I did is that I used that as a baseline. You know how in SAP you would copy standard configuration and then
Yeah.
change on top of it. So yeah, that's what I did, and I tried to mix and match the because a lot of SQL script syntax is borrowed from SQL grammar itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So you started with
So
that.
yeah, so I added all the specific keywords for SAP HANA SQL script, and I did a little bit of because one of the things that it's cool with ABAP is the pretty printer.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I made a pretty printer version of in VS Code as well.
Hmm.
Actually, at first I call it pretty printer, but I realized um, they have a format document built into their API. So
Right.
I changed the implementation and followed their API for format document. And I think this is the part where I realized that my initial intention for syntax highlighting in Next.js has grown much bigger. So that's why I developed the second VS Code extension, which is the Blue Phoenix.
Yeah.
So I made it more generic because I'm bridging between XSJS, XSO data to CAP model. So I just call it SAP development tool for VS Code. Yeah.
Right. And what are some of those expanded functionality that you introduced with the Blue Phoenix version? I mean, you talked about going into CAP, but maybe describe that a little bit more. Uh,
Okay, one that specifically added is the MTA tab and spaces check,
okay,
and then the support for um, uh, icon theme for cap specific artifacts, and then syntax highlighting for the season files. One of the things that I was thinking of doing, I think it was under development, but I stopped the development, is the styling, the CDS styling. But because I was under the impression that, hey, wait, SAP themselves could probably fix the styling, the curly braces, the carriage return after that, those kind of things, indentions. So I think at that time that was writing VS Code extension, it was not fluid yet. But now
no,
with the recent versions of the CAP CDS, it's working fine. So
yeah,
I
okay,
I try to strike the balance. If SAP if I think SAP gonna do it, then I'll just wait for SAP to update their
yeah,
extension.
yeah. All right, that sounds good.
Mm.
So I mean, so you've built this, and we've seen. I don't know if you had a chance. We've done a couple of videos throughout the week on building VS Code extensions, and it showed the process of what it's like. You know, I think it's great the fact that they run in a little sandbox version of VS Code. You know, so like debugging and stuff is really easy. It just opens a remote version of VS Code, and you're debugging against that, and you don't have to install the extension. What was it? I mean, describe for you what it was like building the VS Code extension in this environment. I mean, obviously, very different than doing day-to-day development because you're building a development tool, right? There's
Mhm.
some different things about that. Were there certain challenges that you had in like debugging that or setting it up? And of course, you're doing a lot of stuff against HANA. I mean, were you running against HANA Express or Cloud, or what was your setup like, basically?
Okay, so at first I find it difficult coming from from UI5 XSJS, and I know there's a whole lot of thing in npm that needs to catch up on.
Hmm.
But then again, they're using TypeScript. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the major hurdle,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Yeah. So TypeScript is, I like the idea because I'm coming from a strongly typed programming language, which is ABAP. I like the
Right.
idea of strongly typed programming language. So what I did is I I stepped back a bit when I was doing grammar language syntax highlighting. You don't even have to deal too much about TypeScript. But when you started to do VS Code extension APIs, then you have to deal with the TypeScript documentations.
Right.
So what I did is I gone through some online tutorial about the basics of TypeScript. And soon after, I found myself starting to understand the sample programs from
Hmm.
Microsoft, and started implementing some of the extension APIs. And for debugging perspective, when I started to launch the sandbox, I think there's a difficulty in terms of um, client and server, because when you implement, it's like the client is your extension, and then the language server protocol is another service that's running and processing all your requests. So I think that's a bit tricky. But then again, after I got to understand, the separation between the architecture of language server protocol, that's how I started dealing with extension APIs. Extension APIs is just a service that you call within the client itself, and it will do all the talking to the language server protocol. Yeah. So far that's all the things that I can recall that is quite challenging.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the open source and community aspects of this. So was this pretty much a solo project, or did you have any other contributors?
Pretty much it's a solo project. I did. By the way, because I think, I mean, in every part of the world we experience lockdown,
Yeah.
right? So it was just, at the time that I have so much time on my hand. I don't have to travel to work,
Yeah.
and something that you have to get past. I think in the initial few weeks I've been watching Netflix and stuff, and then I said, hey, maybe I need to look for something to get busy on, and yeah, this is the one that struck me most, get me too busy enough into um, during the lockdown.
Yeah. Uh, so this seems to be maybe unfortunately somewhat common in the SAP community space, that a lot of projects are solo efforts. I mean, we have a few outlier exceptions, like ABAP Git and things like that, where there's lots of contributors, but there seems to be lots of solo projects. That's one thing we hope to do with Devtoberfest, is get more people used to and familiar with the idea of contributing to such projects. But yeah, that does seem to be a pretty common aspect of our community. But I think once we grow that idea a little bit more, and people do become a little bit more familiar with the process and the idea that you can do it, hopefully we'll see more contributions. Um, but on that subject of the open source projects, was there any complications with your employer? This is a question that always comes up, and this is a touchy subject because it's like it has to do with your job and legal and stuff like that. But like for those of us at SAP, as SAP employees, there's two different processes. There's one that we follow when we're producing something as employees to publish, and it goes like into SAP samples or something. And there's a totally separate process where if we want to just contribute to something on our own time. And there's a clear distinction there between own time development and something we do for the company, but even our own time development, like we have to get approval from our manager to make sure that it doesn't conflict with SAP IP or anything like that. So I'm always curious, what did you experience yourself, or was it just I just did it and didn't tell anybody? That you hear that quite often, but what was your approach?
No, it's not that I have a discussion about my employer about this, but my employer knows that I have social media exposure in recent months,
Uh-huh.
right? And so far, I think I'm getting a good support on that. I
Okay.
just try to make sure that whatever content that I produce is something out of directly on what I do and not exposing any IPs. That's
Right.
why I like to give sample programs that are based in Northwind services.
Yeah.
Yes. So in fact, I just released the latest open source work that I did, which is a demo for Fiori element using cap model, and
Yes, I
it's
saw your blog
using,
post the other day. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's using Northwind service, and some of it are also borrowed from the idea of, I think the Sempra service model. I don't know what Sempra from SAP means, but it's a SAP sample that um, that is managing products, right?
Okay.
Like Xflight. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can use the API Hub Sandbox as well. There's an S4 HANA Cloud Sandbox that's available, but you do have to inject your API key. And that's one thing that we're preparing to show. My team's preparing to show for TechEd. We're building a demo for TechEd right now, but we're just using an app router as the proxy in front of API Hub, and then we inject the API key into the header request there. So you just configure it in your local development environment, and then you're able to like call those like sales order, business partner, and stuff like that services in that sandbox environment. So that's always another option. It's very similar to like Northwind, but put you in the SAP domain space.
Okay, wow. Okay, I think I'll try to consider using that approach. Yes, I've seen the API Business Hub, and I think it's one of DJ Adams' session that
Yeah,
you.
yeah. But we're going to publish that. We're working on it right now, and we'll release it as a source code sample of how to do that as part of it. But yeah, just since that came up. Yeah, I've got a couple questions here from the Q&A. From one here. Have you a feeling on how companies deal with open source IDE extensions? Open source tools, codings are problematic often. So maybe speak from your own experience at your employer. How is it accepting an open source IDE or VS Code in general, or anything that you've heard from other people?
Uh, our organization is pretty much always on the cutting edge. That's why we are more into cloud development, cloud foundry stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So having a modern VS Code IDE is actually quite easy to convince them. So the idea is, whatever is the latest, as much as it's backed up by SAP, it's quite easy. My employer is actually a 15-year-old company, which started as small. When I joined the company, it's about less than 200 people. So it's not a big corporate company that it's difficult to change things. So it's more like progressive. That's why I didn't have any issues introducing new stuff. When we introduced XSJS,
Yeah.
I was really able to use it in a project. And as a matter of fact, I did CAP project not long ago, sometime June. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another question or comment here, and I'm not sure I've got the context. Fury tools will support that as well. So feel free to add to the chat or follow up on that question. I'm not sure if that is a question. Will Fury tools support that as well? And it was from a couple minutes ago, so maybe I lost the context of exactly where that was, where in the conversation that was asked. So if there's more details there or follow up, feel free to post that. And we're coming towards the end of our time together. We'll wrap up here in a couple minutes. So I do invite our participants to ask any additional questions. Now's a good time to ask them before I wrap up. Maybe to give you a second to think about any additional questions you might want to ask Jhodel. But before we do that, plans for the future, plans for how you for Devtoberfest specifically, since that's why we're gathered together here. Anything you want to promote or recruit people to participate in?
Oh yes, I'd like everyone to participate on the idea of contributing open source projects to Devtoberfest. I think what Thomas and his team has been doing here is great, and it's all for the benefit of us SAP developers. I think this is something that we need to be united and connected, right? And also, I have started this open source project of giving out a demo application
Mm-hmm.
using Theory Elements and CAP. So I invite everyone to help to contribute so that we could have a bigger area of showcase, because right now I'm just doing list report. There's a lot of other floor plans available there. And also I believe that with the combination of these two frameworks, Fury Elements and CAP model, actually we could build applications with consistency and high quality in lightning speed. I like the idea that you don't have to code a lot to get something decent up and running.
Yeah. Yeah, or even something very advanced like draft support with just the one annotation with Fury Elements. I'm always kind of amazed by how much functionality you get there right out of the box, or with just a few annotations. So that's really good. And I like the fact, you've built this multiple VS Code extensions in the fact, but for Devtoberfest, you're focused on this. What some might consider simpler, but source code sample, right? Because not everything has to be I'm building a whole tool set or a whole library. I think just as valuable can be samples and documentation, example usages. And the other thing about Devtoberfest is you don't have to come up with the whole idea yourself. You don't have to start the whole project yourself. Come and contribute to one. You've set up a project where you're going to focus on Fury Elements and CAP and show some examples. Maybe somebody just wants to contribute by adding an additional sample to that, or rounding something out. And that's that's what we really hope to do. Get a couple people that have been lurking and consuming some of the open source projects, watching some of the enablement, get involved, contribute, and your project is ideal for that. I mean, it's low barrier to entry to get started. You don't have to be a deep expert in open source or things like that. Contribute to your kind of project is very, very accessible, I think, and I appreciate you taking that approach.
Yeah, you triggered something when you were explaining that. During the times that I was just consuming or reading through the blogs written by in the SAP community, I I learned something from them. But the thing is, now that I'm contributing, I feel that I learned a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to learn things that I want to explain to other people.
Yeah.
Right. So the retention and the understanding is much more than you just consuming it and doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, very
So
good point. Yeah, that by giving back, by teaching others, you have to master the topic yourself, right? There's some self-interest built into that very active giving back to the community, right?
yeah, that's right.
So very good. All right. Well, I don't see any additional questions from the participants. We'll probably, yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate you joining us this morning. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. Hopefully it sparked some ideas, not just about VS Code extensions, about contributing to the community in general. We love highlighting our developer heroes, the people who are out there doing this sort of thing, and giving back to the community. It takes a small number of people to get the wave started, right? There's always has to be some people at the forefront, being the first to contribute, being the forerunners, and we appreciate those who do that. So thank you for joining us here today. It's been great talking with you, and I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of Devtoberfest. Get out there and contribute back to the community. That's what this is all about. So thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Thomas.
All right.